Early. So I, felt rather at ease, and I thought I should come before you and tell you our story. So this is something brief. I'll be very brief because time at hand is very short. Shall we go to the next slide, please? This is a museum. Science museums, like other museums, I'll be using these slides as a prop. I'll be talking impromptu. We use objects instead of words to tell stories. That is what we do. These objects, mostly in art and archaeology museum and in other museums, are artifacts. They are objects. But in science centers like ours, we make our own exhibits to a large extent. So we have that liberty, and we can make our own exhibits and use them to weave a narrative to explain science to students. That is where the difference between science museums and science centers come. Science museums are quite old, about 500 years old in the whole world. In India, perhaps 100 years old. But science museums have only objects. The first science center started in the United States, San Francisco. It's called the Exploratorium. It was opened by Frank Oppenheimer, the brother of Robert Oppenheimer, who was behind the Manhattan Project. And that consisted exclusively of exhibits which are made and put up for understanding of people who come there. And so these became two entirely diverging genres of science museums. Well, we are a science center here. We have science museums at Calcutta, the Birla Industrial and Technological Museum, Vishwesvaraya Industrial and Technological Museum at Bangalore, and so on. And we tell our stories using a two-pronged approach. One is using expositions. Expositions meaning permanent galleries and temporary exhibitions which travel all over the country. And the other is, activities. When we say activities, we do a lot of actual hands-on storytelling, science demonstration lectures, and, we take buses with a lot of activities outside the museums to rural areas, to places from where people cannot come to the museums, and we take science to people outside the science museum. Next slide, please. So I will not go through all this because this is something PR professionals would know, how we do a museum, how we use objects to weave a story. Whatever objects we have, whatever exhibits we can create, we put them all together and weave a narrative through them so that a chronological story is told. It could be any topic. It could be climate change, it could be natural disasters, it could be the human body, it could be whatever. Next slide, please. And why is storytelling important? This perhaps has been discussed. I will not go into this much because storytelling is important because when you come to a complex subject like science, it is not very easy to communicate science as they do in schools. In schools, as Madam passingly mentioned, a captive audience is available. When the teacher starts the period, the kids have to stay there. And then science can be taught using the conventional chalk and talk method. And children have to conform, and they have to write an examination, they have to pass the examination, and things like that. So that can be done in schools. But to communicate science to non-scientists, to other people, policy makers, to all kinds of people, we need to tell a story. Science is very complex, and if you choose a very complicated topic, we need to choose every topic. When we say science, it is anything from physics, astronomy, right up to biotechnology, microbiology, and so we need to be very, very lucid when we explain science to our visitors. And then, communicate data dramatically. Data essentially in the session before us. I think Nimishji mentioned about data being different from, information, wisdom, whatever. So to communicate data dramatically, if I put up a list here, that list is not going to be very interesting to most people, nor can anybody comprehend it. Put it in the form of a graph, maybe a little more. But if you make it into a form of a drama, if you tell a story around it, which I will illustrate using one or two small examples as we go along, So all these are the important reasons. This PowerPoint presentation will be available here. If anybody is interested, they can collect it. It's free for use. So these are some of the basic reasons why storytelling becomes very important, especially in science museums. Next slide, please. Well, this is one example of Indian science. This is the topic here, how Indian science is explained to our visitors using storytelling. Now, that is how perhaps a traditional museum would show this. That is a page of Sushruta Samhita with a small write-up. Sushruta, for people who may not have heard, was the first surgeon in the world. That has now been established. And we have created a diorama. A diorama is a scene in which we have shown Sushruta operating on a person. We have also shown 21 instruments devised and used by Sushruta in his surgery, which drew inspiration from the beaks of birds, claws of birds and other animals. These drawing inspiration from these, Sushruta created these instruments, and those instruments are also displayed there. It's not seen in the picture here. And what we call as some of the most modern surgery, cosmetic surgery these days, rhinoplasty, for example, nose reconstruction. Some actresses are supposed to have gotten that done. If you have too long a nose or too short a nose, you can create a perfect nose so that you look good. Now, about 600 BC, that is more than about 2,700 years back, it was Sushruta who did the first rhinoplasty, nose reconstruction. Now, if I just say this, it is written there also, but it doesn't end there. Unless you tell a story, it doesn't work. Why would somebody want their nose reconstructed that many years back, about 2.5 millennia back? In those days, the punishment for criminals in India tended to be, very severe as well as compassionate. See, if somebody steals something, you cut off their hands. If somebody runs away, cut off his legs. That kind of thing affects a person's life. So what was done? The kings, if somebody was caught doing something really bad, they used to cut off the nose of that person. Now, when anybody sees a person without a nose, they immediately know. Nobody loses a nose in an accident. People lose hands and legs in accidents. People lose, perhaps they die in an accident. But losing a nose is somebody must have done it deliberately. And they know why it was done deliberately. And moreover, if you don't have the nose, you have your nostrils. One can breathe using your nostrils, so it is not going to affect your life very significantly, but cosmetically it is very bad. And in this society, you are looked down upon. That is where the term naak katwana comes from in Hindi. Naak katwa diya isne. Bachche ne naak katwa diya. So people never wanted to go around with a cut nose. So they used to go to Sushruta. Sushruta devised a technique whereby he put a cut here like this, representing the profile of the nose. He folded it down and then he sewed it and made a pseudo nose. Now he did that not by cutting something from the thigh or something, but from here, because the blood flow needs to be continuous. You cannot remove a skin and graft it here and think it will grow. It won't. You need a tissue which has a continuous blood supply. So the blood supply comes like this, but it is folded here and reconstructed in the form of a nose. So this story, when you tell, people get very interested. When you talk about the instrument inspired by claws and beaks and all that, they get interested. So we tell stories like this. Next slide, please. This is another story. India had a very rich tradition in mathematics. We thought of very big numbers when people were, struggling to count up to 10. And in Roman numerals, if you want to write something like, 25,380, it becomes very, very cumbersome. Reading it becomes still more cumbersome. So a legend was there that Brahma, the creator, has created the universe and he is sitting somewhere with 3 pegs like that, as you can see on the other side, and 64 discs piled one on the top of the other, the biggest in the bottom and the smallest on the top. Only one disc may be moved at one time. Each move consists of taking the upper disk from one of the stacks and placing it on top of another stack on the empty rod. I wanted to demonstrate this here, but the time being so short, I didn't. And no disk may be placed on the top of a disk that is smaller than it. Using these three conditions, if you try to transfer all one by one from one to the other, you need to, Brahma needs to take at least 2 to the power of 64 minus 1 moves if he does everything correctly. And that is about millions, billions of years. And they say when Brahma completes that those movements, the universe will end. So that story was told in order to introduce very big numbers, which otherwise would have been very boring. If I write a very big number, 2 to the power of 64 minus 1, people would have been bored. So this story made it rather interesting. The next slide. Yeah, we made a globe with water removed from the surface. And you can see one dot there, that near that red dot there is a white, you see it is actually a blue colored glass dot. Actually, that is the amount of total water available on earth. Total water available on earth, not drinking water, total water. Children are taught again and again in schools that 70% of the earth is water, and so they think a lot of water is there on earth. There is no need to worry. But no, the actual water, that is on the surface only, and the earth is huge. So that is the amount of water you have. And that includes water in the sea, which cannot be drunk directly, water under the ground, water inside organisms, all kinds of things. Those explain how much water is available. A tiny amount of water, and with the exploding population, everybody cannot be supplied with water in the coming days. That is made very immediately clear when people see these exhibits, and they really understand the concept that water scarcity is a truth that has to be faced. Next slide. This is another thing which people are not aware of. We are thirsty because we are hungry. To eat, we create food. Perhaps sometimes meat, sometimes fruits, coffee, alcohol, whatever. You can see there, that is the water footprint of an apple. 70 liters of water goes into making an apple. 3,400 liters of water goes into making 1 kilogram of rice. So it is like this. A lot of different food items. This is also there with an interactive computer kiosk of a house, of a kitchen, which if you touch and see each item there, how much water it consumes. So we may have to go without water in the future because we are eating. I am not saying that we should not eat, but we should be very conscious about the water footprint of each item that we are eating. If rice takes up more water, better switch to millets, which take very less amount of water. And if meat takes up a lot of water, not for any other reason, but just because it takes up a lot of water, we can switch to a plant-based diet and things like that. The choice is left to the person who sees this, but this is the cost in terms of water of everything that we use. Even cloth, the dress we wear, a shirt, a simple cotton shirt is about 1,700 liters of water. Next slide. So this is the nuclear power gallery where we tell the story of how nuclear power need not necessarily be harmful, and it can be useful, and it's the most non-polluting form of power generation available to India right now. Not just India, the whole world. It has got bad connotations all over the world, but this is the best form of power, the most efficient form of power available. Next slide. Yeah, these are some of the glimpses, and I will finish with one. Please go on. Please go on with this. Yes, next. Yeah, the previous one, please. Penicillin. We have all heard of penicillin. I can talk about it this way. I can say penicillins are a group of beta-lactam antibiotics originally obtained from Penicillium molds, and I can show that. On the other hand, next slide, please. There are stories behind this. The story of Alexander Fleming. I'm not telling that story right now, but if you can get in touch with me or come to my science center in the future, you can see all this. The story of Albert Alexander. Each of these is worthy of a thriller novel. The story of Margaret Rousseau Hutchinson, of the soil in a church in Scotland, and so on. There are so many stories. each, worth a novel, which makes the story of penicillin very interesting. And this is how storytelling per se is going to make science museums and science centers. And then going back to, finishing with what Parekh Saab mentioned about Smithsonian, there is a culture of museum going, an innate culture of museum going in America and Europe, which sadly is missing in India. And that is where I seek the help of PRSI to create a public understanding of museums. At the last count, I know there are about nearly 100 museums in Delhi itself. 100 museums. I don't know how many any of us have visited. I haven't visited 100 museums in Delhi, though I have been here for more than 3 decades. And so PRSA can perhaps, help us reach more audience, and more audience reaches. Thank you. Thanks a lot.